being Republican has really nothing to do with that. If Bush's father were in, and this is not a joke at all, I do not believe we would have been in Iraq. We would be in Iraq, and would be sleeping very easy about Iran. I have no belief that George H.W. Bush would carry out any of those crazy policies. Clearly perceived as crazy with him. I am worried about this team. But not only this team. The truth is that in their trying to show how tough they are and how they're just as crazy as Republicans, whatever, I don't like to put it that way, but the fact is that all three of the major Democratic candidates have adopted Bush's rhetoric on this. Hillary has not withdrawn her vote for the Kyle Lieberman bill, which James Webb, Marine officer, former Republican, just recently switched to being a Democrat. I think he was Secretary of the Navy in between as a Republican, called the Kyle Lieberman bill the fulfillment of Cheney's fondest pipe dream, in giving a green light to the president, which I think he can claim, that he has a green light with that bill still in to attack Iran. And remember, by that time, the rationale had already shifted from nuclear threat to alleged attacks on our troops in Iraq. I say alleged because in this case, Iran may be supplying IEDs, explosives. They may be. As I heard Pat Buchanan say last week, and I read Pat Buchanan, I agree with him very much on foreign policy, as a matter of fact, as I do on with Ron Paul. And I heard Buchanan point out that if there are attacks over there, he says, which he found easily believed, they could very well be in retaliation for what Cy Hirsch has been reporting for 2 years. The special forces covert operations we're running in Iran and have been for more than 2 years, killing Iranians. Well, or killing people in Iran, Baluchis and others in Iran. That's a new one to me, that it might be that. It would not be very prudent of the Iranians to do that. But I point out, if they think we're retaliating, that's asking for an attack. But one thing I did notice was that whereas in 2002 we were inundated with evidence of the false claims of WMDs, this time no emigres, no forged documents, no eyewitnesses, defectors, no nothing. The president has just said, they're attacking us in Iraq. They presented zero evidence on this. I was saying, it may be true, but they don't even seem to feel that they need to forge up evidence anymore. And Congress lets them do it. And by that I mean a Democratic-controlled Congress just as much as the Republican. And whether the motives are exactly the same, and they wouldn't be, it's a different mix. The Republicans' instinct to follow in a disciplined way their leader, it's just like the Democrats when they have a Democratic president. That's bipartisan. And so the Republicans have that motive, the Democrats don't, but they have other motives to act in the same way. Okay, what could possibly be done about this? I haven't even talked, I've spent the whole time on the issue of aggressive war, the issue of disastrous war, the disastrousness of the president being allowed to believe that he alone can decide. I am the decider, he says. He's not the first to believe that. He says it more openly, that's the difference. And he acts on it. But other presidents have believed that. A difference here is that Congress has done less to disabuse him of that than almost any other Congress, but they passed the Tonkin Gulf Resolution under Johnson too. That's happened before too. I would say the Constitution had it right on this issue and a lot of other issues. As I read somebody say today, those rich white males had some good ideas. And this was one of them. And we should try to get that one back, where Congress, not because they're wiser, but because that should be a collective decision, more representative of the country. As Taft said, it should not be one man's decision. I haven't even talked about what I actually had meant to make the main point, the constitutional issues, other constitutional issues that are raised, but I'll refer you on those to a nearly all Republican group called a coalition of conservative groups called the American Freedom Agenda.org. And you can look it up on website. It's one word, AmericanFreedomAgenda.org. And it was started by Bruce Fein, F-E-I-N, who was the Assistant Attorney General under Reagan, and who has been writing terrific stuff. And you'll see on the website some of the articles he's written, some of them in the San Francisco Chronicle, about the dangers of the executive power that this particular administration, building on some things that Clinton did, actually, but has gone much further in executive power, again, unconstitutional. Fein was joined in that by Richard Viguerie and Bob Barr, who has been very good on civil liberties issues. He was the House manager, as I recall, of the impeachment of Clinton, or one of them, which I didn't admire tremendously. I had mixed feelings about that, actually. I certainly didn't disagree with those who said that Clinton's lies to a grand jury were serious. I thought they were serious, and that it's always serious if you do that. Whether that impeachment was an appropriate approach is another matter. Barr was in charge of that, but Barr since then has been extremely good, is extremely good on the issues of civil liberties and freedoms, and I trust him on that. I've read a lot of stuff by him, B-A-R-R. So you can look that up, and one thing that there, and here's one last practical thing. October 15th, just a month ago, 6 weeks ago, Ron Paul, Republican presidential candidate, introduced a bill which he calls the American Freedom Agenda Bill Act, which enacts the 10 specific things which this conservative organization proposes, which I endorse fully. I haven't even talked about these things, but they rescind the Military Commissions Act, they restore habeas corpus, they restore the control of the FISA court, bringing a court into the process of surveillance. Maybe we can get into that in discussion, but I haven't discussed any of these things. I'll just say, for reference here, that act, I think, deserves to be passed. It demands to be passed, in my opinion. There's no none of the three major Democrats, I don't think, would endorse that act. They wouldn't dare to do it in favor of what they think would be opposition. But Paul did do it. Kucinich would do it, the 1% people here. That's too bad, because it desperately needs support, even just to raise the issues. So people refrain from defending the Constitution for their fear of what it will do to their careers, whether they're politicians or officials, or in some cases, citizens. I did make many promises of secrecy, like Dick Durbin, which I broke, unlike Durbin, in '69. Many years I didn't. 12 years I didn't. Then I broke them. I made agreements like Nancy Pelosi and Jane Harman, two Democrats, who it now turns out were briefed on waterboarding and on the torture in 2002, 5 years ago, and felt they could not tell their staff or their fellow committee members on the Intelligence Committee, or their fellow congressmen, or the public, of what was blatantly illegal, because they promised secrecy. Now, I was talking to a lawyer today about this, somebody who was actually in a Republican administration as a prosecutor, and saying, doesn't that make them complicit? And she said, Elizabeth de la Vega, and she said, without any question, they're accomplices. If this was illegal, they are at the least accomplices in this process, in the eyes of a prosecutor on this. And I don't think that's good. That's not a minor little shortcoming of Nancy Pelosi at this moment. I took the same oath they took, and that every officer in the U.S. Armed Services takes. Civilians and officials take the same oath. We also, in national security, sign a lot of secrecy agreements. But we also sign an oath. Those are not oaths, actually. They're agreements, contracts. We take an oath. And the oath is not to obey the president. The military officers have a commander-in-chief. The civilians actually don't. You and I don't. Marv, you and I had a commander-in-chief when we were in the Marines. We don't have a commander-in-chief. He's commander-in-chief of the armed services, and we're not in that. And as such, we're subject to the Universal Code of Military Justice, which is something different from the Bill of Rights. Our oath was not to obey the president, it was not to keep secrets, and it was not to assure that our party won a majority in the next election. It was to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I violated that oath in '64 without realizing it. And I violated it every day from then on until I finally told Congress what they'd been lied to about. The government is filled today with people who understand they are looking at criminality. Others who don't think it's a crime or it's all right or it's necessary. There's an awful lot of people in Justice and CIA who think that what they're serving is law-breaking. Every day they keep their mouths shut about that, they are violating their oath to the Constitution. And what I learned in the course of my now long life, I learned a while ago, was that the Constitution deserved to be upheld in these respects. It deserved to be defended by my life as a Marine. It deserved to be defended by my willingness to go to prison, if necessary, in '69 and '71. It's worthy of commitment, of lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. And it's going to take some courage and effort and commitment on the part of a lot of people, more than they're now doing, to get it back. Thank you.
One question here.
Well, you presented some very compelling arguments, and of course, hindsight is always 20/20. I think that there are some points that you've made as facts that are disputable. However, what really troubles me is it seems to me that you're advocating treason on the part of our people in our government, and I believe that if we go down that road, that the result can be far more devastating than what you're presenting. In other words, if a person we have to have some kind of discipline. And if every person in the government is a loose cannon to go off and release any information they have, whether it's true or whether they even fabricate it, is very dangerous.
I hear that as a very serious question. I respect the seriousness with which you raise that. You're not saying that lightly. Of course, you're making a very serious charge, you know that, but serious matter. It's not the first time that I have heard that I've been called a traitor, very simply.
I'm not calling
No, you're not calling, but
that
that I'm advocating treason because I'm advocating that people do what I did sooner than I did it. Not an individual. Yes? Can't hear me?
A quick question.
Wait, pardon? I'm answering this question. May I say, when I'm asked that question, I sense that I'm not, or I hope I'm not talking to a lawyer or a constitutional lawyer. Is that fair?
I'm a dentist.
Okay. Well, I'm no lawyer. I'm a defendant. But I have had an expensive education in the law, and I wish I'd had it earlier. For instance, let me guess that the people who raise that question, the word treason, which is distinct from saying a bad idea, or a bad policy or bad approach. And there's much to be said for and against what I'm talking about here. I'm well aware of that. After all, I acted differently in good faith for a dozen years myself. But treason is an important word. We hear it a lot now. I think very few of them are aware that our Constitution has a definition for that felony. of treason. It's the only felony defined in the Constitution. And the reason it's in the Constitution is so that it cannot be broadened without a constitutional amendment process. They adopted a very narrow definition of treason, which is aiding and abetting, an enemy of the United States with intent to help a foreign power, is the way it comes up in the law when it's spelled out in the law, with intent to help a foreign power or hurt the United States security. Very narrow notion, mainly during wartime. Very few people have been accused of treason, a handful. And the reason for that was that our country was founded by traitors. Every single one of them, a loyal subject of King George III in 1774 or two, and every one of them liable to be hanged as a traitor for signing the Declaration of Independence or fighting in the war. Remember what Patrick Henry's line in the approach to the war. He's called a traitor. If this be treason, make the most of it. But they signed it up in the Constitution to try to reduce the number of times you'd be called traitor. As a matter of fact, Patrick Henry had a very interesting quote much later when they were going through the Bill of Rights. He wanted, they were asserting the Bill of Rights had to be in there. He was arguing for trial by jury as a basic principle. And he said the reason for that, a jury of your peers, which on the whole meant your neighbors, a local jury. And he said, I am not so old that I may not again be called traitor. And when that happens, I want to be judged by a jury and not by a president. That's what he was saying. Now, so I do, when that word is used loosely, which is not the way you were using it, I take considerable offense at it. I do think, though, that it's important for Americans to understand what I finally believe I came to understand, which is in this country, it can't be treason, and it isn't even illegal to tell the truth to Congress or to a court or to your countrymen, even if your boss doesn't want it, even if you can be fired for it, even if you can lose your clearance. But actually, we don't have an Official Secrets Act in this country for most forms of secrets. There is an Official Secrets Act for communications intelligence or for the names of intelligence covert operators. That came up in the Valerie Plame case. That's why they were able to bring newsmen in. We don't have an Official Secrets Act, and the reason for that is the belief that you can't have a democracy if the president has the final word and the only word as to what the public shall be told and what they shall know in that. And I think that's a wonderful principle which almost no Americans know, and I wish they did. If we get an Official Secrets Act, which we may well, under not only this president but another president, people won't even know that there's been a change. The change will be that every time you read in the paper, in the Times or the Chronicle or whatever, we have this document, which we're paraphrasing, is classified, or the people who told us this were not identifying because it's classified. Have you seen that phrase? Because it's secret? Every time you read that, the Attorney General, Democrat or Republican, will also read it. And all they need to do is to call in the journalist, if there's an Official Secrets Act, which we don't have, and say, hey, a crime has been committed. You've admitted it. That's your byline. Who committed the crime? Who told you this anonymously? Who gave you that document? And if you refuse to give it, if the journalist refuses to give it, go to jail like Judith Miller. And some will last 90 days, as she did, and most won't. Some will last longer. You won't have any more leaks. Now, for good or bad, I don't think we have enough leaks about lies and wrongful things like this. We would not know about the NSA surveillance, clearly illegal. We would not know about the torture. We would not know about the CIA destruction of tapes, which is clear-cut crime. I just read there, Jonathan Turley, professor at Georgetown, wrote the other day, said there's 6 laws they can prosecute under this one. They told Congress, the CIA told Congress, we have no interrogation tapes or transcripts, when they did, and they knew it. Lying to Congress, they lied to some federal officials, lying to public is not a crime. But lying to Congress in this testimony, they lied to courts who demanded those things. They lied. A judge today turned down the attorney Mukazi's demand that he, this judge, Kennedy, stay out of this problem. He said, no, I'm not going to stay out of it. I made this order and it's been disobeyed and I have to have an investigation here. So he lied to a court, destruction of evidence, obstruction of justice, obstruction of Congress, and torture. All of them illegal. And clearly, according to Turley, we've identified at least 12 people who are subject to those charges right now, and almost certainly many more. So hundreds of people have known about that criminality for years. The transcriptions were made in 2002. They were destroyed in 2005, 2 years ago. That's been known by a lot of people. Who is investigating it now? The Inspector General of the CIA. But as Turley points out, wait a minute, the Inspector General has admitted that he knew of that destruction 2 years ago. He is a subject of a prosecution. He is not the one who should be investigating this. So we come back to the point, can you have a democracy with effective total secrecy, especially sanctioned by criminal penalties, which we don't have yet. But we have other penalties, firing, clearance, and so on. Can you have that if that secrecy is effective enough that you're never going to find out if the president does commit crimes? And we're not talking Republicans here. Let me say, the president I worked for committed most of the same crimes as Bush, but he wasn't found out till after he got out. And if he had been found out, I wouldn't count that the Democratic Congress would have held him to account. But he was just as impeachable, for sure. That got us Vietnam. And the secrecy now, which is far more effective than we need it to be if we want to be a democracy, got us Iraq. And it may get us Iran. Now, you can say, well, you need discipline and maybe the benefits outweigh the costs. Well, that deserves looking into. My experience says no.
Yeah, it's a rhetorical question. If your loyalty, if you're sworn to uphold and protect the Constitution, your loyalty is to the Constitution, why would, disobeying your boss be treason if he's disobeying the Constitution?
May I say, from my point of view, with all respect, I would say it clearly isn't treason, although it will be called treason, and not only by Ann Coulter. I looked up my name in Ann Coulter, the book on treason. I thought, well, it should be at least a chapter. But no, there's just a brief mention, Daniel Ellsberg, the felon Daniel Ellsberg. Now, I thought in this country, you were a felon if you'd been convicted of a felony, which I haven't been. I don't know, is Ann Coulter a lawyer or not?
Yeah.
No? Okay, well, all right. She needs a little lesson. But anyway, so let's put aside the treason. The question is, I think the larger question is, are you violating your oath? Aren't you violating your oath if you keep that secret on the Constitution? Well, of course, it depends what the secret is. But if the secret is that Congress is being lied to in the question of war and peace, or if they're keeping secrets about clear-cut crimes like warrantless wiretapping or torture. A case can be made for torture. Cheney believes in it. Lots of people believe in it. But it is illegal. If you change the law, you could still question whether you should be doing it, or whether it was disastrous, or whether it was immoral, but you wouldn't be subject to prosecution. Why was this obstruction of justice carried out? Because they were afraid of prosecution, because it was clearly illegal. When you keep silent to Congress and courts, in this case courts, about a clearly illegal process,